Thomas was an ordinary office worker whose life was going on as usual until he caught a strange virus. The illness began with a slight fever, headache, and fatigue. Doctors assured him that it was nothing more than a rare infection and prescribed him rest and standard medications. A week later, the fever went down, but instead of recovery, something inexplicable began. One morning, Thomas noticed a small scar on his hand. It was strange, because he clearly remembered that he had never injured this part of his hand. "Probably scratched myself and didn't notice," he muttered, trying not to dwell on it. But the scars became more numerous. First small scratches, then long, deep lines that looked like old, healed wounds. They appeared every night, and in the morning the skin was covered with new marks. Even stranger were the patterns. On his back, Thomas discovered symmetrical lines that resembled something ancient, like carvings or writing. They didn't hurt, but their appearance seemed as if they had always been a part of his body. The skin of his face had changed, too. Spots began to form around his eyes and temples, becoming darker and more pronounced. They resembled marks from blows or bruises. But the most frightening thing was that these marks did not disappear like normal bruises, but became more and more distinct. Thomas went to the doctor, but the doctor only shrugged, saying that it could be a skin reaction to the disease. However, Thomas saw that the doctor avoided looking him in the eyes. With each passing day, the changes on Thomas's skin became more and more strange. One morning, standing in front of the mirror, he noticed a mark on his neck that looked like a burn. He ran his finger along the scar, feeling the roughness, and suddenly a flash of light entered his mind. In an instant, someone else's life flashed before his eyes. A man standing outside a burning building trying to break in, screaming someone's name. The fire burned his neck, but he kept moving forward. Thomas staggered back, clutching the sink, trying to come to his senses. It was too real, too vivid. The next day, a new mark appeared on his wrist, like a deep cut. As soon as he touched it, the flash of light entered his mind again. Now he saw a young woman holding a knife in her hands. She was desperate, her tears streaming down her face, and blood was running down her wrist. "It's impossible," he whispered, pulling his hand away. Thomas began to realize that these marks weren't his. Each one was a piece of someone else's life, someone else's pain or memories. They seemed to be imprinted on his body, as if he were becoming the bearer of these stories. Dreams began to haunt him. In them, he saw faces, voices, and events that could not be his. He felt emotions he had never felt before: fear, rage, regret. Sometimes he woke up feeling like he had just experienced someone's death. One evening, while studying the marks on his chest, he saw a complex pattern, like a map or an ancient symbol. He noticed that the pattern seemed unfinished, as if a new painting was continuing to cover his body. The more patterns appeared, the more Thomas felt connected to the strangers whose lives were written on his skin. And the more he realized that his own identity was beginning to dissolve. The changes were irreversible. Each morning, Thomas woke up with new scars, patterns, and spots covering more of his body. His skin no longer resembled human skin. It was covered in stories that weren't his, as if his body had become a living canvas for other people's lives. With each passing day, he felt like he was losing himself. It became difficult for him to remember his own past, where he was born, what job he had. Even his own name seemed distant and foreign. Instead, his mind was filled with the memories of others. One day, when he looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize himself. His features had changed. Deep, dark pits had appeared where his eyes should have been, reminiscent of the ones he had seen in his visions. His mouth seemed to be locked in a permanent grimace of pain. "This is not me anymore," he whispered, but his voice was hollow, as if it did not belong to him. At night, he stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt new memories invade his mind. It seemed to him that he was becoming dozens, hundreds of people at once. He saw their deaths, heard their last words, felt their fear. One night, sitting in the darkness, he felt everything inside him freeze. His own thoughts suddenly disappeared, as if someone had turned off the light. In their place, a multitude of voices arose. "You were a vessel," one of them whispered. "Now you are one of us," another added. Thomas tried to scream, but only a weak groan escaped his lips. His body no longer obeyed him. He rose from the bed. His movements became unnatural, broken. Approaching the mirror, he saw that his face had changed completely. It was alien, assembled from the features of dozens of other people. Now he was someone else. His own essence was gone, dissolved in these lives. The next morning, no one was found in the apartment. Only a thin strip of leather pattern remained on the floor, like the last piece of who Thomas was. And somewhere in the city, a new man appeared, with an unfamiliar face, but with eyes full of strange stories.